Hi, I'm Perry Atkinson, General Manager here at theDove. Hey, check out our other videos and check out our website at thedove.us. Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and what a delight to have with us today a very special guest. Stephanie Fast is with us, and she's the author of a book that tells a fascinating story. And the book is entitled She Is Mine, A War Orphan's Incredible Journey of Survival. And I think you're in for a real treat. We're going to keep Stephanie here for a couple of segments to hear her story. But you may want to check the book out, and that's what it looks like. And you've got a picture there on the screen. And look for it. You have it at Amazon?
We have it on our site, which is stephaniefast.org.
Okay.
Amazon is also selling it.
Good.
Yes.
Well, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming and being with us today. Fascinating story. First of all, tell us about your work and what you do.
Well, we actually work with orphans overseas, and our main job is really to hear their stories. So I go and share my story with them, and we listen to their stories because we feel like every orphan needs a voice. We also build what we call group homes for children in Haiti, and in Ethiopia we work with women that have been working on the streets.
Wow.
And to provide a way of income for them so their children don't end up on the streets.
Wow. This whole orphan subject, we hear about it bits and pieces, but not enough. And I know that you want to bring more light to it. How big is the issue out there?
Well, right now, the United Nations is estimating that there's over 200 million orphans.
200 million?
And, you know, a group of that would be children that have parents, but their parents just cannot afford to feed and clothe them, so they just basically drop them off in orphanages. So to say how many of them are without mothers and fathers, that's really hard to say, but it's becoming an epidemic at this point because of the wars and, you know, famine and different things that are going on. There's just every day they're estimating anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 orphans a day. That's added to that number.
Well, a little bit of a personal connection. My father was an orphan. And so we have great regard for orphanages and their work and what goes on there. Well, tell us about your story. Unbelievable story. And yet it's inspiring.
Yes. Well, I say I am a miracle. There's really no reason why I should have survived my childhood.
Wow.
And yet here I am, loving Jesus, and so excited about life.
Wow.
Yes. But I was a war orphan, the Korean War. It's a war that really, as Americans, they probably know least about, and yet over 38,000 US soldiers lost their lives in the short amount of time in South Korea. I know nothing about my dad except that he was an American GI. And I know little about my mom. I lived with her probably the first 3 to 4 years of my life. I always hesitate when I say that because I really don't know my age. I was given an age after I was adopted, like many orphans are, because, you know, orphans don't have any papers to say, you know, when they were born.
You don't really know your age.
No.
And you really don't know your birthday.
That's right, yeah. So I can just celebrate every day.
Well, let's have a cake.
That's right, why not, right?
Okay.
Life is all about celebration.
Yeah,
yes.
right.
Yeah.
So what happened?
Well, my mother, my memory sort of begins with trouble going on. I remember a lot of yelling going on, and I think my mom must have been living with her extended family. And in South Korea, for a single woman to have a child, that's taboo to begin with. And then a single woman to have a mixed blood child, that is
Even more so.
even more so. And so I think she was given an ultimatum. You know, if you're going to get married and start a family, you can't start a family with this child. And so she actually abandoned me on a train with the promise that she was going to come and get me.
That's pretty normal, isn't it?
That's very normal,
Yeah.
yes.
She left you on a train.
She put me on a train. She gave
And
me
how old were you?
Probably
roughly?
about 4 and a half, maybe
Okay.
going on 5, but yeah, around that age.
Left you on a train.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Oh, I remember it vividly. That's really, but it's like a memory that's etched into your brain. And I remember going on a train ride, and getting off, and I was told by my mother that an uncle would come and pick me up, but he never showed up. I didn't know where I started. I didn't know what to do. A train conductor basically told me I needed to leave the train station. So the first night I slept under an oxen cart next to a train station. And, 4.5 years old, the night noises, scared, spitless. I remember crying for my mom. The next morning I got up, went back to the train station because I believed my mother. I believed someone was going to come for me, and no one came. The second night I slept under the same oxen cart, more scared the second night. The noises much, much stronger. Hungry the second night. The first night I had a little bundle of, meal that my mom had made for me. But yeah, that was the beginning of my wanderings.
I'm sure you can talk about then on for long, and I want to come back to bits and pieces, but why were you primarily unwanted by your mother's family? Was it because of your mixed race?
Well, one, that my mother was not married.
Okay.
Second, the worst is because I was mixed.
Okay.
Yes.
So that was a cultural, social
That
no-no.
was absolutely a no-no.
Wow.
Yes.
When did you realize you were abandoned?
I think the second day.
The second day?
Yes.
What did you do?
Well, that was really sort of, I went back to sleep that night, and the next morning I was pretty determined as a little girl to find my way back home. And that's what I did for the next 3 years.
Really? And how did you go about that?
Well, I survived.
Yeah.
That's the first few days I followed the railroad tracks because, I thought, well, the train came this way. So if I just go back the way the train came, eventually I'll come to the village that I started in. But of course, I eventually lost the train tracks and wandered in the rice fields and in the mountains and in the different villages. Back then, many of the villages looked very similar. So when I saw a village from a distance, I would think, that's my village, and I would run towards it, and of course it would not be. And so,
did anybody take you in?
No. I was a mixed blood. They had a special name that they called children like me, Tugi, which, means half-breed, in a nice term. But in reality, it's pretty much they're calling you child of dust and nothingness. They did not see myself as a human being.
How did you survive?
I'm a miracle. I am a miracle. One advantage is I wasn't abandoned in a city. I think I would have, in a city I might have been found and placed in an orphanage, but in the country I had resource, at least in the spring, summer, and fall, to steal food from the farmers. So in the spring I would eat the fresh grasses and the frogs in the ponds. In the summertime I would steal the fruits and vegetables that the farmers were growing. In the fall I would eat the locusts and the grasshoppers that would be hanging on the rice stalks, and that was my nourishment. But it was the winters that was so difficult because nothing grew in the winter in South Korea. I had no shelter. I actually slept in the little burrows that the soldiers had dug during the war, and that was but it got cold in those things too and got hungry, so I would crawl down to the nearest village to steal, but in the wintertime, not too much to steal. And oftentimes I would get caught by the farmers and punished in very, very severe ways.
Amazing. So much there. Did you, as a young girl during that time, did you ever have any desire or inclination to pray?
I didn't know anything about God.
Okay.
Nothing about God at all. But looking back on my story, I realize now that I had a spirit.
Okay.
And I believe it was a God-given spirit. That just when it seemed like my flesh wanted to just give up and die, something would rise up within me. And every once in a while, in really tragic situations, someone would come and rescue me. and not rescue me and take me to somewhere safe, but rescue me from that situation and say, you need to live, little girl. It's very important that you live. Now looking back, I realize they were messengers from the Lord.
They're angels.
Right.
When did you get discovered? When did you find a family?
Well, when I was about 7 and a half.
So for 3 or 4 years, as far as you know, you were living like that.
I was living like a wild child, yeah.
Wow.
Basically, that's what I was labeled. You know, the clothes that my mom had put on me basically had disappeared by then. I had lice, my hair was all matted. I was skinny as a rail. I had scars all over my body, boils. You know, I was pretty much emancipated, just very, very skinny, and basically became a wild child, yeah.
Wow. I wish I had you for 3 days. I got to take a break. When we come back, I want to share with us who picked you up as a family.
Yes.
And how you found God.
Yes.
By the way, all of this is in this fascinating book, and you may want to grab it. She's Mine, a war orphan's incredible journey of survival. And you're just getting bits and pieces of it. You may want to check that out. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with Stephanie. Okay, we're back, and our special guest today is Stephanie Fast. What an incredible story. I wish I had you for about 4 days, because I think we're just scratching the surface here. She's authored a book, She Is Mine, and you may want to check this book out at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, or you can go to stephaniefast.org and get a copy of the book there. A war orphan's incredible journey of survival. And you talk about a miracle. We're talking to a miracle today. And Stephanie, fascinating story. You were abandoned by your mother somewhere between 3 and 4 years old. You were left on a train. She left you. You went to who knows where, some village. And you wandered as a wild child for at least 3, maybe 4 years.
About 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eating what you could find to eat, wearing what you could find to wear.
Yes.
You are a mixed child, so you're American and Korean, and that was a no-no in your culture, so you were an outcast. All right, so who discovers you? Who picks you up?
Well, when I was about 7 or maybe 7 and a half, every summer back in the 60s, there would be a small cholera epidemic that would break out. It just, you know, at that time, South Korea was still a third world country, and summers were very, very hot. And I think, well, I shouldn't say I think, I had the beginning stages of cholera, but by that time I had wandered into a fairly large city, and I was living with street children under the bridges and along the riversides. And my group, they became a family, and I woke up one morning and my family was gone. I think they knew that an epidemic was starting, and they decided to go back out into the country. In my delirious stage, I found another little child that was trying to figure out someone to take care of her, and she was screaming, and I said, okay, well, we'll get some food for her and I. But I had lived in the city long enough where the market farmers that ran the market recognized me as someone that stole, and they caught me that day, and they took me to a building that had been bombed out during the war. But also it was right along the river, so it was like a breathing ground for gutter rats. I don't know if you've seen gutter rats, but they're not pleasant, right? And I was basically thrown into that building as live baits, live bait for the gutter rats. And that, I remember being thrown in, I remember screaming, I remember watching these rats as they were coming towards me, but that's the last thing I remember. When I woke up, I was looking into blue, blue eyes. A Swedish nurse found me on a garbage heap. I cannot tell you how I went from the building to a garbage heap.
The Lord.
Yeah. And a Swedish nurse decided to go home through what she called garbage lane. It was a landfill that they were filling in with garbage, and she saw me. But her first reaction was not to rescue me, because again, there were thousands of children that needed rescue. She knew there was a summer fever going on, and I was like 7 years old, too old for her clinic that she was running. And so she was basically gonna leave me there to die. But God spoke to her, she actually heard an audible voice. And the audible voice said 3 words: "She is mine."
Wow, that's the name of the book.
Yes, yeah.
Wow, so she picks you up.
She picked me up, took me back to her clinic, nursed me back to life, and then she placed me in an orphanage.
Okay.
And I was in that orphanage for about 2 years. But again, when you're 8 and 9 years old, you sort of become a worker in the orphanage. You're getting too old. You're getting ready to be phased out. Back in those days when you were like 10 or 11, a lot of them were sold as bond servants to wealthier people. So I was 9. So my job was, washing all the diapers and taking care of the kids. And that was sort of my lot in life. And the orphanage did everything that they could, but they didn't have the finances that for the hundreds of children that were in there. So our care was very minimal. And but it was better than the streets.
Wow.
And that's where I lived.
Warm water and a roof.
Warm water, that was about it. Runny corn mush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so tell us, we're going to run out of time, but tell us, how did you find God?
Well, I found God after I was adopted. Yeah. In the orphanage, they did send you to church, and I heard about God. I could not fathom the God of love because I didn't know what love felt like. And so, I had been told now for 9 years that I was a mistake and that no one wanted me. So how could this invisible God love somebody that nobody wanted? So I could not really receive God at that point. I was too young to really even understand. Yeah.
So an American family adopted you?
Yes. Yes.
At the age of 9?
9.
Okay. And where did you go to live?
Well, they brought me out of the orphanage when I was 9, but I was not officially adopted till I was 12.
Okay.
As you know, with adoption, it takes 2 to 3 years. But I had the privilege of living with them because they were missionaries in South Korea, and that's when I was really introduced to Jesus. I saw it through my adopted dad. He was just an amazing man.
Did you pray to get adopted?
No, I didn't know what adoption was. Even after I was adopted, I didn't know what adoption was. Yes.
You didn't understand the full impact of what it was.
No.
Wow. Tell me about your encounter with Jesus.
Well, I had, it's really hard to explain to people because I had my first encounter with Jesus when I was 10 because I wanted to make my adopted parents happy. So I thought, I want to do what makes them happy. So I said the Lord, the sinner's prayer, and I was water baptized. And when I was about 16 years old, I had a really emotional breakdown, and so I had an encounter with Jesus then. But I think my life began to change, and I had a yes spirit that no matter what, I was going to follow Him, and that was when I was 17. Yes.
Wow. You're in the United States.
Yes.
You learned English.
I learned English.
You did it, and beautifully.
Thank you.
Beautifully. Must have been quite the transition.
It was. I mean, my mom and my dad spent hours with me with those flashcards.
Yeah.
Like we use with the little children.
Right.
And just recognizing sound with pictures. And I actually started memorizing scripture verses even before I could speak English. And so my mom said my first words were like, Psalms 23 and different scripture verses.
Really?
Yes.
When did you realize that the Lord was going to call you back into this work?
I did not want to ever share my adoption story or my orphan story. That was my story. No one should know. My parents only even knew parts of it.
Wow.
And it was not until I got married and I realized I had some deep inner pain and I was acting out on my husband. But back in the early 70s, there were no books out on inner healing.
Yeah.
And so we had to basically, the two of us, fast and pray and say, God, for this marriage to work, you need to help us. And so that's when I began to share. My husband knew because I would have horrible nightmares. And he prayed, and eventually the stories started coming out. But I still did not want to share publicly. And then one day we began to work with street children, and I began to hear some horrible stories that happened here in America. And the Lord said, you got to do something. You can't just open the Bible and tell them Bible stories. They need to know someone walked in their shoes. And so that's how our ministry sort of began.
You know, again, I've said it, I don't know how many times on this program, whatever God saves you from, brings you through,
Yes.
He turns you around, makes you a minister too. You seem to be very comfortable with that now.
I am very comfortable with it. I have seen miracles happen for thousands and thousands of people because they just needed to hear someone say, I understand. Yeah.
Is abandonment epidemic today in the world?
I believe abandonment and rejection is a disease in the world.
In America?
In America, in Christian churches.
And that's sad. So when people hear your story in a Christian church, are you surprised that they come out and say, that's my story too?
Over and over. The first time I was on a radio station, a famous radio station,
You're the most famous one now. No.
Yes, one of the famous ones.
Yeah.
They had tens of thousands of letters from people saying, she's telling my story. And they could not understand it because they're saying, are they all orphans? But if we're orphans of the heart,
Yeah.
we don't.
You're abandoned by family and
right.
loved ones.
Yes.
And it can be totally emotional and psychological.
That's right. Yeah.
What materials do you have besides your book that would help a person who feels abandoned or parents who are trying to deal with somebody who's been abandoned?
Well, we have a DVD series called You Are Mine, which is similar to that. And it's a 4-part DVD that I break my story down and then give teachings with it. And then we have a workbook that goes along with it. We have another DVD series that's called Journey Ahead. That's actually my story after we were married and how God went through different healings in my life. And we're actually just in the process of putting a workbook and a DVD series together that's going to call No Longer a Slave. Yeah.
All right, and all of that's available at stephaniefast.org.
Yes.
All one word, stephaniefast, FAST.org, and also check out the book. Do you feel compelled to go back to Korea for anything?
Oh, I have gone back to Korea many times.
Really?
And I believe, again, that was God's assignment. The first 3 times I went back after I was married, I hated every minute of it. And, you know, what's amazing is your perspective and attitude, people respond accordingly to it. The first 3 times I went just because God told me to, and I hated it. And the people treated me the same way as when I was a small child.
Really?
The 4th time, as I was flying into South Korea, I heard the voice of the Lord say to me, welcome home, Stephanie, welcome home. And honestly, it was like God said, you need to realize this is home. And my whole perspective changed. And so even the immigration officer treated me differently.
Really?
It was just amazing how when we carry who we are in Christ, people respond to you accordingly to it. And that time in South Korea, my experience was totally different. And God used me with South Koreans that were born internationally.
Wow.
You know, again, they're not mixed like I am in blood, but they are mixed in culture, because now South Korea, you know, they go all over the world, but so when they come back to South Korea, they don't know who they are.
Stephanie, you are an inspiration.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
I want to get you back. I got to scoot here, but let me just say to our viewers and listeners, check out her book, She's Mine. There's a picture up there on the screen. You can go to her website, stephaniefast.org, and get it there. Amazon. Incredible story. But if you are dealing with abandonment at any level, no matter what level it is, I would recommend that you get a hold of Stephanie through her website, stephaniefast.org. And if the Lord's leading you to kind of connect with her and maybe deal with the subject in your church or whatever, there's a lot of resources there. Stephanie, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You are an inspiration. What a story. You are a miracle.
I am a miracle. Yes, I am.
Well, blessings on you. Thanks for being with us today. Okay, we'll be right back.
Thank you.